Hello, welcome to the Experimental Photographer. In this episode, we will be tackling the big subject of multi-exposure single capture. So what is multi-exposure single capture? Well, basically, it means exposing several different scenes in one frame, plate, slide, or in the case of digital, one capture. This is the same technique as the classic double exposures from the golden years of photography, but potentially combining many exposures within a single capture or photo. So why on earth would we do this when it would be so much easier to capture several different shots and then just combine them later in editing? Well, I have no real answer to that question. All I can say is that there is something tangibly real and pure about this type of photography. And it's also quite a challenge. So if you are a person that enjoys the composing, lighting, and shooting aspect of our art, then I think you will find something compelling in this technique. And I guarantee that if you try it, for one, you will be amazed at what you've done, and you will also take pride in the fact that you did it entirely in camera. To briefly recap, multi-exposure single capture is exposing several different scenes onto a single photograph. How do we achieve this? In a nutshell, we open the camera shutter, we manually expose a scene, cap the lens, change the camera's orientation, uncap the lens, and then manually expose a different scene before closing the shutter. And we can do this many times over within a single shot. For example, in the photo shown here, I started the shot by first locking the shutter open. I lit the tree orange and purple, then I capped the lens, rotated the camera upside down, uncapped the lens, and then lit the tree purple and orange before quickly closing the shutter. Multi-exposure single capture is best done at night or in a low light setting, although it is possible to do it in daylight using strong neutral density filters. I've already mentioned the most basic concept of multi-exposure single capture, which is open the shutter, manually expose, cap the lens, move the camera, uncap the lens, and then manually expose again. And we can do that many times over in a single photo. If you are shooting film, slide, or plate, then there is feasibly no limit to how many times you can do this, as film doesn't degrade in the camera box. With digital though, there is a limit to a photo's duration, as the sensor will heat up, creating noise that will eventually ruin the shot. I find that threshold at ISO 100 to be around 10 to 12 minutes. You may be able to push that to 15 minutes in cooler ambient temperatures. Now that we have covered the basic method of capturing several scenes into a single photo, let's look at how to arrange several scenes so they work together. The basic concept here is to leave dark areas within the first exposure and then fill in those dark areas with subsequent exposures. It's very important to realize that light can only be added to a capture and not taken away. In other words, once a section of image has light in it, it cannot be removed or darkened. It can only be made lighter until eventually it becomes pure white. So it's good to leave lots of dark areas. If you're shooting digital, you can check to see if your scenes will jive together by taking test shots of both scenes and then quickly flipping between the shots on the back of the camera. Tripods are used to preserve the scene, which means that a tripod will be required for each scene. The idea here is that every time you go back to the same tripod with the same focal length lens, then the scene should be exactly the same, unless of course you accidentally bump your tripod. This makes it possible to fine-tune a scene to exact detail. Typically, my photos take a fair amount of test shots and fine-tuning to get everything right, and I also use this time to fine-tune my lighting as well. Ultimately, a large studio full of photography equipment would be ideal. But very little is actually required to get started. A camera with long exposure capability is the primary piece of equipment that we will use. We will also need an external shutter release. Both wired and wireless will work. Each one has its advantages and disadvantages. Wired triggers are simple, quick to set up, and reliable, but they constantly get in the way. Wireless triggers are small, they don't get in the way, and they can be convenient during a shoot. The drawback is that they take more time to set up, they have batteries to deal with, and they can be unreliable. Tripods are next in line, and the more of those, the merrier. Be sure that your tripods all fit the same base plate. Unfortunately, every tripod manufacturer has their own base plate design, which is usually incompatible with the others. There is one industry standard plate though, and it is called the Arca plate, ARCA, or Swiss Arca. Most manufacturers offer heads that fit the Arca plate, and I recommend only purchasing heads that fit the Arca plate. Lighting will be dependent on what you plan on achieving, but some light source will probably be needed. Now that we've covered all the basics of multi-exposure single capture, how to expose several scenes into a single photo, and also how to arrange several scenes so they work together, I want to briefly cover setup and workflow. I'm going to be quick here, and then in future videos I will get into the finer details on things like lens swaps, tripod swaps, and also dealing with your gear in darkness. As I mentioned earlier, a tripod can preserve a composition, a scene, as long as we have the same lens and focal length when we return to that tripod. This is the foundation for composing multiple scenes harmoniously so that we can capture them within a single photograph. Now we can take that one step further and set up all the required lighting and equipment needed for that part of the shot and then just leave it in place. I will refer to this as a station. Now obviously this can take quite a bit of equipment, but it is the most efficient mode. Once each station is set up, then it's possible to move swiftly between the different scenes of the shot. Assuming that we will be working in near total darkness, we need to set everything up so we can find it, often by touch only, and also so we don't fumble, trip, or run into our equipment. And this goes the same whether I'm shooting in my living room or out in the middle of the desert. Setting up stations can dramatically increase efficiency, both in fine-tuning scenes and also in the flow during final capture. Always set your gear that you use during capture, flashlights, triggers, etc., in exactly the same spot. And also set them in the same orientation. For example, I orient the flashlight so when I grab it in the dark, my thumb lands perfectly on the on-off button, and I don't have to spin it around to find it. And the same goes for lenses and tripods if you are doing lens swaps or tripod swaps. Okay, so for this video, I've decided to forego the usual live demonstration. And instead, I thought it would be a good idea to review a shoot that I did the other day. And so you guys can see the steps that it took and the mistakes and the changes that I made to achieve the shot that I had envisioned. On this evening I had a new fisheye lens that I was testing out, and so I wanted to do something that would really play into that fisheye look. And I decided that I would use my hands and the glass ball, and I would clutch the edge of the lens, and then inside the glass ball I'd put a portrait of myself using black fiber optics and swiping my face. And so I started the shoot by setting up, of course. I set a flash unit above my hands, and then I set a second flash unit on the ground, and I gelled that blue. And I put them on remote triggers, which I used. I placed the trigger in my mouth and pressed on it with my lips to fire the shot. And then for the second half of the shot, I used black fiber optics gelled red, and just swiped my face on it. So you can see my first couple of shots here. I was just fine-tuning things, zooming in, trying to get my hands in the exact position. You know, because they're test shots, I didn't have to turn out the lights. I just kind of dimmed them a little. I got to this point, I thought, okay, this is kind of the look that I'm going for. And so I started working on the second half, the fiber optics. And while I'm doing this, I'm flipping back and forth on the back of my camera to see that the two segments, or the two scenes in the shot, are lining up properly. And once I got to the point where I thought they were sufficiently lined up, then I started combining the two, doing the whole entire shot as one. And the goal, of course, is to keep my hands positioned nicely in the center and also have my face in the center as well. And I find that when I use myself as a subject, it's quite different, because you can see I'm, everything's a little bit different every single time. There's no way to gauge exactly where I put my hands on my face. And so, I just keep going. When I got to this point, I think it looked pretty good, but I realized that my hands weren't in focus, the glass ball. So I went back and adjusted the focus. You can see here, it's much better now on my hands. You can see all the detail in my gnarled old thumbs. And then from there, I just continued on. Now, also during this time, I was fine-tuning my lighting, adjusting my lights, and this and that. When I got to this shot, I thought, okay, this is a really good shot. This is pretty much what I was looking for. But I thought I could do better, because there's still a fair amount of ambient light in the background, and my shirt is reflecting a ton of red into the shot, as you can see there. So I put on a black hoodie, which actually eliminated quite a bit of ambient light there, and then proceeded. You can see every once in a while you got to go back and do test shots to make sure everything's lining up properly still. You didn't accidentally kick your tripod or something like that. So when I got to this shot, this is pretty much the one right here. This is what I was looking for. I ended up doing one more after that, but this is the one. This is the cleaned up version. But this is the raw file straight out of the camera. No modification to it whatsoever. You can see everything's pretty sharp. Really nailed my face in the dead center of the glass ball, which was the most difficult part of the whole shoot. And you can see here's the cleaned up version. Got the spots out, hot pixels and a few pieces of dust. And then, from this point, everything's set up, and usually after I achieve the shot that I wanted, then I go back and just start experimenting, start tweaking things, changing things, having fun. This is really the funnest part of the evening, is after you nail the shot you want, and then you can just let your imagination go and see what happens. You can see here I was just trying different hand positions, trying to put the physiogram in the middle. None of these came out perfect, but I got a lot of good ideas from this. This is where all my ideas come from, is from experimenting, usually at the end of the night. So anyway, that's what it took for me to achieve the shot, and hopefully you guys got some good information out of that.